What's going on, guys, and welcome back to this episode of Split Screen D&D, the place where we're attacking all things Dungeons & Dragons from both sides of the screen. My name's Tom Quinn, resident Dungeon Master here at Modern Myth.
And I'm Josh Winans, resident player character here at Modern Myth.
And we're going to get right into this one.
Ooh, what are we talking about?
I was giving it a little bit of thought, and I think this lands pretty firmly in the DM space.
Okay.
But I was really curious to hear the player perspective on this. Sacred information that as a DM you should never let cross the screen.
Gotcha.
Whether that be narrative, thematic, mechanical, whatever it is. But that information that really is likely to detract from the player experience and may create headaches for you as a DM if you're allowing it to permeate that barrier.
Yeah.
And so I'll be curious to hear the player perspective.
But first, shut your face, because hey, lovely people out there on the internet.
Rocksful.
I know. Hey, man, we just keep growing. We're like the mighty tortoise or the turtle, depending on which story you read, and slowly moving onwards. And we just keep getting more and more subscribers, more and more views. Thank you guys so much for everything you're doing down there. Comments is always fire. So guys, thank you so much. But hey, don't get lazy on us now. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do like this video like a boss. Leave a comment about how we're wearing basically the same shirt. And this is totally unplanned.
This was not planned.
I'm really sorry. If you're watching this, you're probably like,
if it had been planned, we definitely would have ended up with a nice 3-inch square, not a 2.5-inch square.
Fine. Mine's far superior. And if you were in person, you'd see how different.
Drop it in the comments.
Whose
shirt, although almost identical, who
wears it better? I got this one for sure, man.
Okay, we'll see.
But comments, sharing with your friends and coworkers and other D&D-ophiles, that'd be awesome. And if you want to support us directly, check us out at patreon.com/modmyth. But
Man,
I'm getting there, man.
He sounds like a gosh darn professional.
I guess if we get paid, which we do have Patreon, so I guess I am technically.
You are technically a professional. So you sound it. Sound it.
Thank you. So hey, let's jump right back in though.
Yeah, let's get into this. And I think probably many DMs have given this topic thought already. They have already sussed out, because I don't think it's a black and white. I mean, I think every
that was my first point.
Different tables are going to engage and want to engage with a different breadth of information passing through that barrier. I don't know that it's something that a lot of players have given thought to with regard to, man, I'd really love to know XYZ, or oh man, he told me XYZ and it really kind of screwed up. Like it screwed up whether it be the immersion or the illusion, if you want to call whatever you want to call it. To some extent, I would equate this topic to magic, like street magic or stand-up or whatever.
Right.
That it's amazing when you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and it maybe starts to lose some of that flair. So can you take me through the player perspective? I don't know. Well, for starters, prior to this conversation, how much thought is that? I mean, is it a topic that you have given much consideration to, or do you think many players have?
I don't know about many players. I'm an oddball. But for me personally, actually, I have. And you mentioned table to table is going to be different, and player to player is very different. For me personally, I like knowing how games work. I want to know the number that is applied to an attack and the multiplier that's applied when you get bonuses. I like knowing that stuff. I like you mentioned magic. I like knowing how the tricks work. For me, it doesn't detract from the amazing thing that's been created. Actually, it's many times I can gain more further appreciation for what that is. But that is me. I could definitely see for some people that, you lift the veil and it destroys the magic of the world. So I would say I would go player by player.
Yeah, I would guess too that the latter description you gave probably applies to more players, the majority of players.
I would say so. Yeah,
like I said, I'm sure there's a spread of opinions on this on the player side, But that would be my guess, and I think that's for the same reason that I think probably a lot of DMs have considered how guarded or not they should be with that information, because your average player may be detracting more than it's adding to the experience.
And I definitely say go that route. And if you happen to have a me at your table, if I'm really like, hey, I really want to know what happened, don't just divulge everything at the table. Take me aside, talk to me, because don't want to do anything that takes away from other people's enjoyment.
Right. Well, and I think you've even touched a number of times that since we've started this segment, we dip into spaces that probably wouldn't be general table talk from the DM perspective.
And I absolutely love it.
So now with that said, I know you said there's not much information that you would say you're basically bring it on.
Right.
Can you think of any information, like something where you go, if I knew XYZ, it wouldn't, it wouldn't feel as good as not knowing?
Yeah. So, and again, I'm an extreme where I kind of like knowing everything. Some things that would still really bother me. And I know you don't do this, but let's say you fudged a dice roll.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, maybe not.
Yeah. Fudge a dice roll to like save my life, kind of a thing. Like, oh, shoot, I don't want him dying. I'll change the number. If I learn later that you changed the number, I will constantly question whether I should be alive or not. And it'll be really hard for me to be like, well, who cares about my character anymore?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's probably the entire argument against fudging dice rolls, and the further argument against rolling secretly.
Yeah.
There's plenty of people who stand by the position, and I think there's a very solid argument for don't allow there to be any doubt in your players' minds about what you're doing with the dice behind the screen.
But that's a table by table decision. So if you do decide like, hey, I roll secretly, I'm going to fudge a dice roll, I would very strongly don't let your players know, because I think that could be very damaging. So that might be
definitely. Now, I didn't really anticipate the conversation going here, but we've stumbled into a really particularly interesting space. Is the fact that there are regular conversations about should you fudge or should you not, but simultaneously the fact that no players want to know if their DM's fudging, puts it in a really weird space of like, I think some subset of players, like I don't know what the numbers are, the hard and fast numbers are.
We're guessing here,
but some players must understand that their DM is fudging rolls. I mean, like, it's a common enough conversation.
Yeah.
And so is it just a matter of like just keep lying to me, I'll believe you. Like I'm happy to believe. I mean, my feelings about dice rolls.
Well, and I was about to say, until we had these conversations, I truly thought there were times you fudged dice rolls. Until we've had this DM PC talk.
In the spirit of information not crossing the screen, what would have given you that impression? I mean, there was obviously a lack of information that...
the dice roll, the way the dice will roll, but there are times like, there's no way. It's like, come on. Like, it just felt so unbelievable.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the dice roll the way the dice roll, and we have no control over that. But in the moment, I was like, that feels weird.
Yeah. Well, I will definitely say there have been moments where either in too good a fashion, like the dice rolls laid out kind of too articulated arc of tension when it needed to be.
Yeah.
Or something weird. One that always comes to mind was when you guys were in Old Peltark and you were trying to deal with the aspect of the Pit Lord, and there was this crystal.
That was baller.
And
poor Reek.
I was having a really hard time deciding what to do with Reek, and I ultimately decided, like, he's going to throw himself on this.
Yeah, and he
needed
rolled
an 18 plus on 2 rolls, and I basically had written it off, which had major implications for
now that I know
the unfolding story. But in my mind, I just went, this I can't see him not doing this, and that, like, I still, those 2 rolls, an 18 and a 20 back to back, those I'll remember those exact rolls because of how unbelievable. If I wasn't the one rolling them,
Right.
I'd have been like, bullshit. That was horseshit. So I completely get that. But so that's interesting because I guess I didn't realize that. But
Yeah, and I have a whole laundry list of those kind of things. But I would say that's my number one. But kind of curious, well, where do you lie as a DM? Like,
in general, the interesting thing is, and what's funny is because it's pretty rare we lock horns on things because generally I don't think the things we disagree about conflict with one another in terms of our experience at the table.
We found that even when we think we conflict, it's like, oh, we just don't understand each other's argument. Once we understand, we can usually come to
or like for instance, bards are trash, but I'm not a player, so you can play
bards alone, man.
No. Bards
tight.
are not trash. Bards are tight, but I like to rib Josh.
Yeah.
But
Tight.
But but with I think I live on the opposite end of the spectrum, whereas you're kind of a give me what you got. My general thought process on information is if it didn't need to come out per the game, it probably doesn't need to cross the barrier.
Okay.
So I think I tend to, whereas you're valve wide open, I am valve only as open as it absolutely needs to be. I think for a couple of reasons. One, like we touched on an example before we started the conversation of the dungeon. The players have finished. They've I'm going to say cleared out a dungeon, but they've departed this dungeon like in a semi-permanent sense. They've gotten what they came for. Or it's made pretty clear that they feel they've done what they needed to do in this space and they're moving on. And I know you had said like, I'd love to know. Like, so a couple. I mean, there's the obvious pragmatic reasons of I don't have any lever or any way of going. It's pretty cheap. You're going back to that dungeon. Now that I told you, you missed that. But that's literally the only lever I have to pull, short of going like, as you approach the dungeon, you watch some rocks crumble, seal it. And it's just, I mean, it's like the whole point is all we've done is create a scenario where you going back feels disingenuous.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact that there was still an opportunity to go like, and I have no idea that, I just don't know. All I'm doing is making, if I go, hey, that temple that you guys cleared out.
Yeah.
Well, I'll use real world example, not an actual. This isn't true of the temple, but I'll skin it in that space. If you had just kept turning that when you were in the planetarium space, if you had just kept turning that, there was a secret door that would have unlocked, and you would have XYZ. What would I be achieving by like? To some extent, I'm going like, hey, dummies, you didn't find the secret thing I put in there. Right. / but also, if you try to go back, I'm going to think this is going to be horseshit. Like, there should still be opportunities to discover things. And every time they leave a space, rocks can't fall and close it off as though they can't return or have your invisible video game wall that stops you from going back to these places.
There's a door there. I have an axe. No, it's a door. You can't go in because of the door.
Can't do it.
Nope.
It's a door. It's like, well, I can knock doors down. I've done it before.
I have fireball.
Not this one. No, not this one. Don't you see? There's iron banding on this one. So that's one reason is simply what is gained by doing that.
Right.
Now, if it's a deal where let's say our campaign is ended and we're in between campaigns and you and I are having a beer. Maybe having a conversation. I would generally leave that to player prompting. If a player said like, hey, XYZ. But I think certainly whilst a campaign is still going on, or while you're still even playing with that same play group, if you're existing in the same world, you are rapidly going to start creating problems for yourself as a DM that just staying silent solves. Like you're and now if there was something to be gained by doing it, then you'd have a value proposition in front of you. So that's the first point is kind of the why.
Yeah, and so let's say that you divulge something about a dungeon that we left, and the world allowed me to go back there. It would feel really disingenuous for me to be like, oh, I didn't know there was that there. I'm just gonna go back there just because I feel like it.
Right.
That feels really sleazy.
Definitely.
So yeah, that's more of the player, I think.
Well, I think, but I think the question is still there. Is what if there's a player at your table that doesn't mind
Yeah,
being
and
sleazy?
you're absolutely right.
And now I have to go. Do I just let this guy walk back in with player knowledge and do this,
God, but that's-
or do I now take it upon me to do the sleazy thing and go, nope, rocks fall.
Well,
and,
if he did something sleazy, I think you have every right to be sleazy back. But
eye for an eye is. I think that's.
yeah, no, it's never once bitten anyone in the butt. But going off that, I think rule number one as a DM, I think you should feel you are in complete control of what you divulge. If I ask, hey, was there anything else in that dungeon? You could say, I'll never tell.
Yeah,
and that's fine.
I think that's my default stance.
Right. And if I could be like, hey man, I really want to know. Can you tell me? Who cares what pressure I'm putting on the DM?
Yeah.
You could be like, sorry, dude, you could literally put my feet to the coals and I'm going to tell you to go F yourself. But so you're asking like why?
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I like learning this stuff is one, just because I like knowing, but two, it gives me an opportunity to learn. That like, hey, if you turn that wheel, if you could have only have kept turning that wheel, you would have. Now I know, hey, when I'm doing a puzzle and I get the solution, there may be more steps I could take. And now I can approach puzzles in the future with gain knowledge. If I didn't know that, then I wouldn't learn anything.
And a caveat to, or I should say an addendum to the why, I think one would be that space is, and again, I still think there's a time and a place for it that, but certainly that is let's call it a Q&A space where your players can learn about the way you think about building the world.
Yep.
Another big why that I could cite, and it's less a why for me as a DM, but let's say we're all sitting at a table and let's say you're going, hey, I'm running the next campaign. You want to DM the next campaign. I can see all sorts of value in you and I sitting down and talking about, hey, XYZ, blah, 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 blah. And, do you remember that? Do you remember that one dungeon you were in? Well, this and this and this. But clearly that's not for the benefit of the table and the campaign that we're currently in. It's for the benefit of another player who may be looking to cross the barrier into the DM space. And I think there's all sorts of value there.
Absolutely.
We're not really talking, we're getting into these weird fringe spaces.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth touching on here. I think there's, I don't want to say too little conversation about it, but potentially maybe there's even another episode in this space of what can be done to foster other DMs out of the player.
Ooh, that's a
population.
Great subject to talk about.
And so I think we're brushing up against that here.
Yeah.
I would have no problem if you and I are sitting down kind of for academic purposes.
Yes.
Divulging anything so long as I didn't feel it was going to be the detriment of what we're currently doing at the table.
Yeah, because in that you're a resource and your help. Yeah, no, 100% agree with that.
So that would definitely be a big one. Now, I know, you really get a lot out of the mechanical side.
Love that shit.
But something I would be really curious about is, I think even though you have a pretty solid indication, more or less we're kind of working off of what I'll call visual cues for the health of your enemies. Well, your guys' health as well. I'd prefer, I don't have a hard and fast. If you guys are going around the table, after a fight, licking your wounds, and you're like, hey, how you guys doing? If someone goes like, I got this shit kicked out of me, I got 10 hit points left.
Right.
I don't mind that too much. I wouldn't prefer that information be expressed more organically than more mechanically, but amongst players. But I will say, I pretty much never divulge. Now, there are some times where someone will roll, they roll their damage, and I'll go like with the exact amount of damage needed. So then okay, well, hey, he had 12 hit points left. I did 12 damage. just because it's kind of fun, like when you hit it dead on.
Right.
But I'm a big proponent of not going a 38 hit point XYZ,
Right.
or even you hit him dealing X amount of damage.
Right.
He's down to XYZ.
Right.
Again, I much prefer that to be communicated narratively.
Right.
So something I'd just be curious about on your end, a less or a more distilled stream of information would be precisely that, where you go, oh, that spider's got XYZ hit points. This is would that detract from your experience dealing with imperfect information, which frankly is what that situation would be. You would never know how close something is to being dead,
right?
Or how much more fight they have in them.
Right. I like the vagueness in this instance, which is weird because I know I'm countering what I said earlier, like knowing everything. But it's almost a fun game you play. Like, okay, how? Let's say I knock a creature down and he's near death. Okay, he's near death. Do I want to start, I want to conserve my powers, right? So do I go, it's a risk and reward game you start playing.
Right,
I want to make sure I kill it, but I don't want to go use all my powers. So it's almost like a mini game, of rationing your powers.
Yeah.
And which it feels organic in the way that you do it. Now, if I knew 17 hit points, okay, well, I do a 1d6 plus 5 plus a 2d8. I could start playing that game. But
well, I think even though what you're describing is this kind of push and pull of, I know I'll get the kill if I use this power.
Right.
But I think I'll get the kill even if I don't.
But there's,
that kind of, while that might seem like that could bog things down, I think what really could bog things down from a combat standpoint, and 5th edition doesn't need any push towards the bogged down space. I mean, there's already players can do a ton, monsters can do a ton. But I think if you were dealing with perfect information, it would be a deal where you would literally go, well, let's see, this plus this plus this plus this. Okay, definitely if I use this ability, I'll kill this monster.
Right.
Let's see, but if I use this,
right, and
this,
have 5 minutes tick by.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, it might be you might come down within a hit point or two.
Yep.
And any sane player is going to use all the information at their disposal to make the best decision possible.
Right.
And I think that will kind of be the fulcrum of a lot of what I have to say is, if you're giving players enough information that they can put the situation under a microscope because they have that much resolution, that's what they're probably going to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not good for pacing. That's not good for role play. It's not good for there are many ways that can be detrimental.
Right.
Is all I'll say. So I was curious where you stood, because I knew that you do like more information.
I do. Yeah. So I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm pretty aligned with you on that. And as far as knowing my fellow players' hit points, I'm trying to remember. I think we are pretty good about being like, hey, I'm bloodied. Hey, I'm near death. And that's about as far as we go in. I might be wrong though.
It slips on some occasion. Like I said, I mean, that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's really between you guys.
But that fits narratively, especially because healing, the way it works in 5e, which is a whole nother rant you could go on about how healing works.
I can't believe we haven't touched on just a whole episode on healing.
It's a big topic, but
pick any class race combo and you can do it. So it's not true, but it's tongue in cheek, but it's damn close.
Yeah. I think actually Wizard was one of the ones he couldn't. I think the added something to Wizard, so they have healing now. But and then what? Hey, do you heal only when they go down to 0 hit points? So you just keep bringing them back up, or do you? So that's a whole.
This
topic.
is an interesting tangent, but the most optimized thing you can do is let them die.
You know what?
Or let them drop to 0.
I heard someone give a really good counter to that. I really liked if you do come back, you have a point of exhaustion.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think there are things you should be doing to actively counter that, because if you've got 2 hit points left, you go to 0, whether you get hit for 50 damage or 2 damage, you know.
And from a role-playing standpoint, and you're like, no, help me, I'm near death. No, not helping you yet, bud.
Don't worry. Stuff those entrails back into your cavity and
Yeah.
I'll get with you in just a minute.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think so. Anyways, I got in the weeds there a little
yeah,
bit, but
as we do.
But I actually I mean I think healing is a great place, and obviously it's entirely incumbent upon players. But I think that exact same push and pull you're talking about with fighting enemies should be occurring as a healer. Now I think some of the weight of that has diminished because healing isn't near as hard to come by as it once was. But imagine if you knew that over the course of, let's say, a day, let's say we're talking 5 to 7 encounters. That's kind of the prescribed structure. Let's just say it was written in stone. You're going to have 7 encounters ahead of you. You're halfway through your day, and you look around and you kind of go, man, my team's pretty beat up. But you can't know precisely how beat up. As the healer, you go like, well, I've got 3 more instances of healing. Is now the time? And that is now the time, I think, is always a more interesting question than I definitively know the answer and now is or isn't the time.
Well, and then in not in combat, if you're out of combat, you can always ask, be like, hey, fellow compatriots, how we looking? Do we need to top up? And so that's
but
easy.
I guess my point being, and again, this is it doesn't bother me all that much, but I much prefer to hear someone say, I got the absolute shit kicked out of me, and maybe describe like I've got lacerations, literally you can see the spattering of blood running onto the ground as I'm like nursing a serious wound. That's a much cooler. Also, I mean, again, the player is grabbing that paintbrush and painting a visceral scene of their character instead of using just arbitrary numbers that already do a poor job of reflecting someone's health.
So
You know, it's like,
what are hit points even? That's a whole other conversation. And I'm just one before we move on from combat,
Definitely.
about from the player side. One thing I don't want to know, and I know you do this, is if you make combat encounters like less tough. Like you scale back things.
You're talking about in real time?
Yes.
Or you're talking about knowing the challenge of a encounter as you walk in?
That's homebrewing, which I'm totally fine with. Got zero problems. But like let's say we're fighting something and so like, oh my God, that dragon rolled 2 crits in a row. Okay, if I don't do something, it's guaranteed they're going to die. Not fudging dice rolls, but saying like, hey, that breath attack isn't coming back for a while.
Yeah, and I guess I would further clarify that point, specifically the way you set up. If that dragon rolled 2 crits, I am disinclined to do anything about it because the dice determined the potency of that. Now, if I've created a dragon, kind of like you said, where I've gone like, you know what, this creature, I really like it, but I wish the breath weapon was more like this, and I've modified that creature, or maybe I've homebrewed it from the ground up. And then turn 1 goes off, and all I did was, I rolled just normal, I rolled a hit, rolled a miss, rolled whatever.
Right.
And I just went like, holy crap. Like I effectively in that space, and I still agree, if you have to do this, don't let your players know you're doing it. But I do think probably an important clarification is, as far as I'm concerned, the only time that I should be modifying an encounter's difficulty is if I built a bad encounter.
Okay, that's fair.
If the dice are rolling against the players, they're rolling like trash. I'm rolling strong.
Okay.
I mean, that's literally the game.
Okay.
The game is...
Yeah, no, that's a good clarification.
So I did want to clarify that.
That's a good clarification. But like, let's say, like, kind of like what you're saying, that this you designed this thing and you're an idiot because you're DM, and it just was way too hard.
We do that sometimes.
No, just kidding. Yeah, DMs bless you all. But I don't want to know, because let's say hopefully we win. If you're like, man, you guys are lucky that I changed that. Oh, yeah. Cheapen my victory a whole bunch.
That's probably the worst phrasing.
I know, right?
You guys are so lucky that none of the rules even matter.
God.
And there's pretty much no way, given what I'm about to say, that you could ever die, ever.
Yeah, get down from your throne, DM. Like, come on now.
No, 100%. And like I said, reaching a little outside the bounds of this conversation.
And this is the 3rd time doing this.
I know, we're ping-ponging around. Yeah. But we are touching on, and again, I think really important clarification. I think there are people out there who think that it's your job to modify an encounter based on how well or poorly it's going for the players.
That's okay. Yep.
And I think while at face value that may be true, the root of that should be, I designed a really bad encounter. This is an unwinnable encounter because I designed it poorly.
Right.
Or this, and frankly, I don't think the other direction, but even still, it might be a deal where it's like, wow, they are kicking the shit out of. But I mean, how bad does that feel for you?
No.
Each player rolled a crit on their very first attack,
And if-
and they're mopping up, and I go like, "You're gonna roll crits on my monsters? Well, they're all gonna get a lot tougher.
Right.
Like that sucks."
And then the
Like,
reinforcements show up.
Yeah.
Well, actually,
so
that's-
so both directions. But I think if it becomes apparent that you've designed an encounter poorly, it's incumbent upon you. Like nothing feels worse to players than them dying to a bad encounter.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So for sure.
Yeah, but I'm glad that you touched on that from the combat side, and I think a lot of this actually kind of fist bumps the conversation we were having about illusion of choice to some extent, because some of what we're talking about is kind of in that vein on the DM side, and I think as was repeated many times in that episode is like this is one of the most fragile, dangerous tools that you can wield, because if one time your players become aware of this,
it can damage.
you literally have lost all ability. You have sold your trust for the sake of, even if you're in good faith repairing an encounter that was bad. You know, that whatever this was, shit, I shouldn't have put 8 trolls in this encounter. Like that
Level
you know,
1.
that was too many trolls.
Right.
You know, and you know, it's like that. Some of that just comes with experience. But I think, especially as a new DM, you know, you don't want to be the DM who your players are dying so you can learn to DM better. Like, you know what I mean?
Right,
Like
right.
it's so that's
Yeah.
I guess anything else on kind of the mechanical side with regard to.
Actually, no. My next point, I'll bring up, unless you want to.
No,
I'd
I'd love to
the
hear.
exploration side of things. So,
Okay.
I understand that you're the world builder and its architect, and you take a lot of pride in your creations, as you should. But I think it's really, really bad if the DM drops hints that the player has not earned.
Yes. I'm glad you got in this space, because this is probably, I mean, this should have been my point number 1, probably. It really should have, because well, keep going, but yes, I want to. I want to. That should echo resoundingly through the rest of the episode.
Just hearing myself talk during this episode, it sounds like what I'm pretty much trying to say is, like, if the information you're giving is taking away from us feeling accomplishments, because that's what I think a lot of the dangers are, then that's the big danger, and that's where it comes in here. That if you're like, oh, man, I just don't know how to do this puzzle. Hey guys, there is that symbol that's glowing over there.
Right.
You're like, no. Then if we solve that puzzle, which we'll probably do at this point, we didn't solve it.
Right.
You solved it.
Yeah. I might as well have just gone, there's a puzzle, here's the exact instructions for how to do it. If I'm going to drip feed you the instructions, if you run into hard times. And I will say that can be challenging sometimes as a DM, because I mean, there are many a meme of, like, you know, the DM kind of feeling shitty because he slipped a 3rd grader riddle into their campaign, and the party is like stressing out because they, you know.
Well, that's where the dice rolls and skills can help you out a little bit. So that's where you can earn them. Like, how do you earn some hints? Okay, maybe you can, like, if you can't solve a puzzle, maybe someone in town might have a hint. Or I rolled a baller investigation, and because I rolled a baller investigation, I noticed one of the glyphs is glowing more than the others.
Right.
Then I have earned it, and then it's not a big deal.
And I particularly like the example you gave of maybe someone in town knows something, because you can have 5 players standing around the obelisk that they're trying to solve, staring at it, going like, "What are we missing here, guys?
Yeah.
What are we missing here, guys?" And again, as a DM, sitting there and going like, "Man, I thought this was going to be like a 15-minute thing."
Yeah, right,
you know,
right.
like,
Cakewalk.
and I mean, and there are other times where you're like, "Man, I thought that was going to be like the better part of a session," and they just smoked it. It's
Right.
you just don't know.
Right.
But I love the idea of staring at this thing, interacting with this thing is one approach to solving this puzzle. You know,
I like that.
I mean, going in, like you said, asking NPCs if there's, you know, like, potentially something could be gleaned through more lore about the area.
Yeah.
Just leaving. I mean, it may not be detrimental to like leaving and going like, you know what? We know we can go do X, Y, Z. Let's be thinking about this.
Right.
But let's, I mean, like,
Yeah.
there's just, and you said robbing of satisfaction, information that robs satisfaction. I would say the biggest reason it robs satisfaction is because it robs agency. Like even if I'm not telling you what you have to do or where you have to go, if I go, you're moving as you move up the valley, you could see the top of the windswept peak, the glisten of snow blowing off of it. Off to your right, you can see kind of a small shadowy opening, not even large enough for a man upright to fit through, some sort of cave or cavern. And the party goes like, nah, let's keep going.
Yeah.
Again, it's like, it's not my job to go like, but you notice just before it leaves line of sight, you can see like a gleam of gem or iridescence in the dark. And then I sit back and kind of go like, they're gonna bite that? Like how much bigger a chili dog do I need to put in that fucking cave? And the fact of the matter is I think it's only natural for there to be times where you as a DM, just like any of the players, you'll be excited about things at the table. And sometimes those are things the players don't touch. They don't want to touch. They've got no interest in.
Yeah.
And an unwarranted solicitation through information, I think is the hallmark of a DM who is desperate for you to go somewhere.
Right.
And it's not so different from what we were talking about like, hey, I told you about the thing that was still in that dungeon. Well, it feels sleazy for you to go back and get it.
Yeah.
It also feels sleazy if I've sold you on going somewhere that you weren't going to go with your own agency. It's the equivalent of me going like, how can I be mad that you go back into that dungeon and go find that secret room I told you about?
Right.
In confidence, like this was player knowledge, when I give you the pitch for this entry, it's this unassuming, hole, and I'm going like, oh well, it's an unassuming hole. Of course, they got to check that out,
right?
I mean, especially you, unassuming holes is kind of
it's
your jam.
It is Tuesday,
but if you don't bite on that, and it's like, no, we've got a job to do. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
And then I throw that little extra bit in. I throw a little extra, and now you're going like, he really wants us to go into that cave, and now you're in a spot where, if you go, it feels like it wasn't your choice because I mean, even though it still was, but literally I went like, hey, you notice a trail of Reese's Pieces.
I know.
Running in there. And just to some extent, I think anything you accomplish in that space is not going to feel like a moment of discovery or exploration.
No.
It's going to feel like the DM has put something in here that he's really excited about.
It turned into a cutscene rather than exploration.
Yeah. And quite frankly, that's not what you're there to do as a DM. Your job is to put interesting things for them to explore, but your job is not to point at any one of them. It's to literally go in any direction you want to travel. I will make sure something there is interesting there for you to find.
Right.
But so I think it really holds hands with your earlier point.
And I got to sympathize with DMs because you'd be like, oh man, if only you'd explore that hole, you'd realize there's something so amazing in there. But no, they didn't do it. So I do sympathize with that. But I was just thinking, it's like, well, an easy workaround is like, okay, they chose not to go in that hole. I'm going to take that, whatever that was, and put it in the recycle bin, and it's going to come up later.
Yeah, 100%. And that really ties into kind of my first point was the why, like why introduce potential problems by disseminating information that doesn't need to be disseminated. The follow-up to that is, if I go, what was down that, if you had gone right instead of left, it was down that passage, blah, 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 blah. Here's this whole deal. Well, maybe there's some cool traps and cool encounters and
now
cool,
you can't use it anymore.
And I've literally just hamstrung myself from moving that around. I don't think that this is by any means elite level DM concepts, but for DMs out there who aren't actively recycling, like, again, you spend a lot of time conceptualizing encounters and spaces, and there's only a select few instances where it's like this encounter and this circumstance and this can only work in this one place. If they passed it up and they didn't do it, great. If you're in love with it and you think it's going to be really interesting and challenging for the players, you can put it anywhere else you want in the world. Don't do yourself the disservice of explaining how cool it would have been if they had gone there. Let them experience it in the game somewhere else. And more often than not, like I said, I think for DMs out there, I'm sure many people listening right now are like, yeah, I do that all the time. But if anyone isn't, start doing it. It's like, I mean, you in terms of prep, you know, being able to take sometimes entire dungeons. You literally you've laid out an entire dungeon and they didn't want to go into that cave.
Right.
Great. Is there any reason that dungeon has to exist in this exact mountain range with that exact not quite man-sized hole with those exact Reese's Pieces? No, of course it doesn't. It, you know, I mean, the vast majority of the time it can go anywhere.
You find a cave with Reese's Pieces. Who's laying these Reese's Pieces? It comes in a much bigger mystery about the Reese's Pieces than the cave itself.
Well, I mean, if you are not prepared to reveal like a classic 80s ET in your campaign, then don't put the Reese's Pieces because the players are going to be disappointed if you don't.
Absolutely.
But no, I think so. I mean, the really interesting part is kind of as you've been laying out your points, you've hit basically every talking point that I had.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. I've just been able to like sit here and respond and react.
Well, that's pretty much my list, man. You got anything else you want to add there?
I don't think anything hard and fast. I mean, I think both kind of serving as a summary and a consideration. I would advocate that less is more. I mean, as a general rule. Now, again, I think there are some very interesting spaces, and I think as a DM, it's also one of those things where when you have DM friends, you guys almost always do this. You get together and you go, "Oh, I'm thinking about this encounter. I've got this."
DMs don't have friends, dude.
Well, that's true. That's true. when you know other people who DM and occasionally you speak to one another. No, but it's just a deal where like it's I really do think because away from the table and generally alone, you are investing yourself in a lot of this work that goes into making the game. And people who love sitting in the DM chair are excited about doing that. And by definition, you can't really speak with your players. And in many cases, your players are a close portion of your friend group. So some portion of the people you would generally talk about things you're excited about are just kind of out of the question. So I do think there's a really strong, there's a strong impetus to want to talk about these things. And I think too that it can be very invigorating when a player has an interest in those spaces. But I would also think that a lot of times when a player expresses that interest, they themselves might well have an interest in sitting in the DM chair at some point. And that kind of, to me, is one of the most appropriate segues to begin breaking that barrier. And that might better that might better look at like if you and I were talking about it, for me to be talking about something that happened way back in levels 1 through 3, or even a previous campaign than anything recent.
No, I agree.
So, like I said, that's not to say that there aren't appropriate times to do it, but I think we've done a pretty good job of outlining a lot of the potential pitfalls.
I think so. I'm sure we missed some. Please leave it in the comments.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, if there's someone out there who goes, I'm about to lay it out for why nothing's off limits. It's just a total permeable barrier. And why is that working so well for your table out there? Great. I'd love to hear it.
Absolutely.
But in general, I think that the DM screen as an edifice exists for a reason, because it's designed to obscure some amount of what's going on back there. And I think that the degree to which you take that, like I said, ultimately boils down table to table, but I think you'll always be safe to err on the side of less information. So thoughts on the player side?
Yeah, player side from DMs. If you're wondering, player sides come from the DM side. I think you're absolutely right. I err on the side of being less. I think that's a really good rule of thumb. If you find a person who does get a kick out of it, I think you got to be very wise about what you divulge. But know that it depends on the player. Like, I like to think that the reason that I want to learn how your world works is not malicious or so I can use against you. It's because I'm just curious.
That's not true.
That's true. How many dungeons have I gone by? I want to go back to this dungeon, and then I find the belt of giant strength I've been looking for.
Well, how many dungeons have I told you the belt of giant strength is still back there?
3.
No, you have not.
No, you haven't told me one. And from the player side, purely, and bless you for making it this far. This is a pretty DM heavy subject, but from the player side, hey, the DM has he can say no, and yeah, it's
right.
hard, but respect it and be like, hey, he doesn't want to share this part, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I would also say more often than not, it's for good reason.
Yeah, good point.
He's not
Well,
withholding information.
he kind of is a dick.
Well, yeah. I mean, depends on your DM, but you know, I'd say odds are in your favor that's
No, you're absolutely right.
We are of a certain ilk, us DMs,
And you DMs.
but no, I think that pretty much
that's good. I love it.
wraps it up. How we signing this one off?
Oh, I don't know, man. You got any? I'm drawing blanks.
When we draw blanks, I think it's just time to fire out an oldie but goodie. We hugely appreciate you guys joining us
Thank you.
this time. Until next time, the world is yours.